Part 1. Introduction and the Land of the Nile. Introduction, a journey into the sands of time. Tonight, let us begin a journey into one of the most fascinating civilizations in human history, ancient Egypt. Close your eyes if you wish, and imagine the landscape. Golden sands stretching into the horizon, the endless desert broken by the flowing ribbon of the Nile River. The air is warm, carrying the scent of earth and water. In the distance, the silhouettes of pyramids rise against the sky, massive and eternal, like mountains crafted by human hands. This was a land of kings and gods, of farmers and builders, of scribes and dreamers. It was a land where time itself was measured differently, where eternity was not a vague hope, but a constant companion. The Egyptians did not see life and death as opposites, but as two halves of a single cycle, the eternal return, as certain as the rising of the sun over the Nile. As we move slowly through this story tonight, we will follow the arc of Egypt's history from its earliest beginnings to its final decline. We will pause to wander through temples, to hear the myths of gods, to walk among the pyramids, and to sit beside the Nile as farmers harvest grain beneath the burning sun. This will not be a dry list of dates, but a flowing narrative, a soothing river of history. The gift of the Nile. Herodotus, the Greek historian, once said, "Egypt is the gift of the Nile." And he was right. The Nile was not just a river, it was the heartbeat of Egypt. Without it, there would have been no civilization here at all, only endless desert. But every year in late summer, the river swelled with floodwaters from the rains of distant Ethiopia. The Nile spilled over its banks, soaking the fields with rich black silt. When the waters receded, they left behind fertile soil, perfect for growing wheat and barley. Imagine standing on the banks during the flood. The waters stretch wide, shimmering beneath the sun. Farmers wait patiently, knowing that when the river withdraws, life will return. Soon, seeds will be scattered, and the land will bloom with green. In a desert land, this miracle was everything. The Nile also gave Egypt its rhythm. The calendar itself was built on the river's cycle: flood, planting, harvest. The gods were tied to it, the festivals marked by it, the very flow of life measured by its rise and fall. To the Egyptians, the Nile was not only water, it was eternity flowing through their hands. The earliest settlements. Long before the pyramids, before the great pharaohs, people gathered along the Nile in small farming villages. Archaeologists have found traces of these communities as far back as 5000 BCE. Simple mud huts, stone tools, pottery decorated with geometric designs. Life was humble but steady. People farmed the rich soil, fished in the river, and hunted game in the marshes. They buried their dead in shallow graves, wrapping them in mats and placing simple offerings: a pot of grain, a few beads, a tool. Even here, in the dawn of Egyptian history, we see the seeds of their deep concern with the afterlife. Slowly, these scattered villages grew into larger communities. Clans merged into chiefdoms. Chiefdoms became regional powers. The land began to divide into two great regions: Upper Egypt, the southern stretch where the Nile runs through narrow valleys between cliffs, and Lower Egypt, the broad delta in the north where the river fans into many branches before reaching the Mediterranean. The unification of Egypt. By around 3100 BCE, these two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, were united under a single ruler, a moment that marks the dawn of history in this region. Tradition names this first king as Narmer, sometimes called Menes. Narmer's palette, a carved ceremonial stone, shows him wearing the crown of both Upper and Lower Egypt. On one side, he wears the tall white crown of Upper Egypt, on the other, the red crown of Lower Egypt. Together, they symbolize unity. The two lands joined as one kingdom. Imagine the ceremony: the new pharaoh standing tall, his people gathered before him. Priests chant hymns to the gods. Soldiers line the streets, their spears glinting in the sun. Farmers leave their fields to watch history unfold. From this moment onward, Egypt would be ruled not by chiefs, but by pharaohs, kings seen as both human and divine. The idea of the pharaoh. What made the pharaoh different from an ordinary king was not just power, but sacredness. The Egyptians believed the pharaoh was chosen by the gods, a living Horus upon the throne, the son of the sun god Ra. When he died, he would merge with Osiris, lord of the underworld, and continue to rule in the afterlife. Thus, the pharaoh was not simply a ruler, but a bridge between worlds. His duty was to maintain Maat, the balance of the cosmos, the harmony of the world. Ma'at meant order, justice, truth, and stability. If Ma'at was kept, the Nile would flood, crops would grow, and the people would prosper. If Ma'at was broken, chaos would return, and the world itself might unravel. This idea shaped everything: law, religion, architecture. It is why Egyptians built monuments not just for glory, but for eternity. It is why they told stories of gods who maintained balance, and why they buried their dead with such care, because life, death, and eternity were bound together in a cosmic order. And so, from simple villages, a great kingdom was born. The Nile flowed, the pharaoh ruled, and the idea of eternity was etched into the hearts of the people. From here, Egypt would rise into its first golden age, the era of the pyramids, the Old Kingdom. Part 2, the Old Kingdom, Age of the Pyramids. The dawn of the Old Kingdom. With the unification of Egypt complete, a new era began, an age that would see some of the most iconic monuments in human history. Historians call it the Old Kingdom, lasting from about 2686 to 2181 BCE. This was the time of the great pyramid builders, the age when pharaohs wielded near absolute power and commanded resources vast enough to reshape the very landscape. It was a period of prosperity, stability, and monumental ambition. Pharaoh as a god-king. In the Old Kingdom, the pharaoh was not just a ruler, he was the very embodiment of divine order. His role was to maintain Ma'at, the balance of the cosmos, through rituals, justice, and monumental works. Imagine standing in the court of one of these early pharaohs. The palace rises in gleaming white limestone, its walls decorated with painted scenes of offerings and rituals. Priests move in hushed procession. Courtiers bow low as the pharaoh enters, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. To his people, this was not simply a man. He was Horus on earth, a living god. The authority of the pharaoh reached every corner of the land. From the delta in the north to the first cataract of the Nile in the south, governors ruled on his behalf. Farmers toiled, craftsmen built, priests prayed, all in the service of the king and the gods. The Step Pyramid of Djoser. The Old Kingdom's greatness began with Djoser, a pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty. His architect, Imhotep, conceived something the world had never seen before, a pyramid built of stone. Until then, tombs were simple rectangular structures called mastabas. But Imhotep envisioned stacking these mastabas one upon another, rising in steps toward the sky. The result was the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, the first monumental stone building in history. Picture it in its prime, gleaming limestone blocks stacked in 6 great steps, towering nearly 200 feet above the desert. Priests carried offerings to chapels around its base. Incense smoke curled into the air. The walls were carved with scenes of eternal life. For the first time, the Egyptians had built a stairway to eternity, a literal bridge between earth and the heavens. Imhotep was so revered for this achievement that he was later worshipped as a god of wisdom and healing. His creation set the stage for even greater monuments to come. The Pyramids of Giza. When we think of Egypt, we think of the pyramids, and none are more famous than those at Giza. During the 4th dynasty, these monuments remain among the most awe-inspiring works ever created by human hands. The first was built by Pharaoh Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops. His pyramid, the Great Pyramid, rose to a staggering height of nearly 500 feet, the tallest structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. More than 2 million blocks of stone, each weighing several tons, were carefully cut, transported, and fitted together with astonishing precision. Imagine the scene. Tens of thousands of workers laboring in the desert heat, hauling blocks along ramps, chiseling stone, shaping the pyramid day after day. Some were conscripted peasants working during the Nile's flood season. Others were skilled craftsmen who lived in nearby workers' villages. These were not slaves, as old myths suggest, but laborers paid in bread, beer, and shelter. At its completion, the pyramid shone with polished limestone casing stones, gleaming white under the sun, visible for miles across the desert. At night, it glowed beneath the stars, a beacon of eternity. Khufu's successors continued the tradition. His son, Khafre, built the second pyramid, slightly smaller but still immense. Khafre is also credited with the Great Sphinx, the colossal statue with the body of a lion and the face of a king, carved from a single block of limestone. Guarding the plateau, the Sphinx gazes eternally east, toward the rising sun. The third pyramid, built by Menkaure, was smaller but richly decorated. Together, the three pyramids of Giza formed a sacred landscape aligned with the stars, a reflection of the heavens upon the earth. The purpose of the pyramids. The pyramids were not simply tombs, they were engines of eternity. To the Egyptians, death was not an end but a passage. The pharaoh's body was preserved within, but his spirit, or Ka, would ascend to the gods. Inside the pyramid, narrow passageways led to the burial chamber where the pharaoh's sarcophagus was placed. Around him were treasures, food, furniture, and offerings, everything he might need in the afterlife. The pyramid itself was a symbol of the sun's rays, guiding the soul upward. In building these monuments, the Egyptians were not only honoring their kings, but affirming their belief in immortality. The pyramids still stand today, nearly 5,000 years later, silent witnesses to their faith. Daily life in the Old Kingdom. While the pyramids rose in the desert, ordinary Egyptians lived lives tied to the Nile. Farmers plowed the fertile fields with wooden tools, sowing wheat and barley. They fished, hunted birds with nets, and herded cattle. Their homes were simple, made of mud brick with flat roofs where families might sleep on hot nights. Meals were modest: bread, beer, onions, and occasionally fish or meat. Music and dance filled festivals, and children played with carved toys of wood and clay. Religion permeated daily life. Small household shrines honored gods and ancestors. Amulets were worn for protection. The great temples were not just places of worship, but centers of learning, economy, and politics. The fall of the Old Kingdom. For centuries, the Old Kingdom flourished, but around 2181 BCE, it began to unravel. The reasons are complex: poor harvests caused by low Nile floods, rising power of regional governors, and perhaps the sheer burden of pyramid building on the state's resources. As central authority weakened, the unity of Egypt fractured. The once mighty pharaohs lost control, and local rulers, the nomarchs, grew more independent. What followed was a period of decline and chaos known as the First Intermediate Period. But Egypt would not remain broken forever. Out of the darkness, a new dynasty would rise, ushering in the Middle Kingdom, an age of renewal, art, and literature. The Old Kingdom left behind the most enduring symbols of Egypt: the pyramids, the Sphinx, and the idea of eternity carved in stone. Even as centuries passed, later Egyptians would look back on this time as their golden age, when kings were gods and monuments reached the heavens. Part 3, the Middle Kingdom, Age of Rebirth and Literature. The First Intermediate Period, a time of chaos. After the splendor of the Old Kingdom, Egypt fell into darkness. Historians call this the First Intermediate Period, lasting from about 2181 to 2055 BCE. The Nile's floods grew unreliable, harvests failed, the great authority of the pharaoh collapsed, and local governors, the nomarchs, ruled their districts like little kings. Instead of a unified nation, Egypt became a patchwork of rival territories, each vying for power. Imagine the despair of a farmer in this age. The river does not rise high enough to water the fields. Crops wither, famine spreads, families go hungry, bandits prowl the roads. Without the stability of the pharaoh, even the rhythm of the Nile seems broken. Yet even in this darkness, Egypt's resilience endured. Slowly, one city in Upper Egypt, Thebes, began to rise. Its leaders were strong, its gods powerful, its armies disciplined. By around 2055 BCE, King Mentuhotep II of Thebes defeated his rivals and reunited the land. With him began the Middle Kingdom, a new dawn for Egypt, the reunification. Mentuhotep II's reign marked a rebirth. He restored Maat, bringing order back to the land. Trade routes reopened, temples were rebuilt, the Nile's rhythm returned. For the people, it must have felt like waking from a long nightmare into the light of day. At Deir el-Bahri, near Thebes, Mentuhotep built his mortuary temple against the cliffs of western Thebes, a stunning blend of terraces, ramps, and colonnades. Later pharaohs, including Hatshepsut in the New Kingdom, would take inspiration from its design. With Egypt once again united, the Middle Kingdom could flourish. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom ruled with strength but also with pragmatism. They understood the lessons of the Old Kingdom's collapse. No single man, no matter how divine, could ignore the needs of his people. These kings took a more humble tone in inscriptions. They were still divine, yes, but also shepherds of their people. Their art shows pharaohs with more realistic, sometimes even weary faces. rulers who carried the burden of keeping chaos at bay. One famous pharaoh, Senusret III, expanded Egypt's borders with military campaigns into Nubia, securing gold mines and trade routes. His image, carved in stone, shows a strong but careworn man, his eyes heavy, his mouth stern, a ruler who bore responsibility with solemn strength. Art, literature, and philosophy. If the Old Kingdom gave us the pyramids, the Middle Kingdom gave us literature. This was Egypt's classical age of writing, not just religious texts, but stories, poems, and reflections that reveal the Egyptian mind more clearly than ever before. Scribes trained in hieroglyphics began producing works that still survive on papyrus and stone. Among them were the Tale of Sinuhe, the story of a courtier who flees Egypt after the king's death, only to long for home and finally return to die in his beloved land. It is both adventure and meditation on loyalty and belonging. The Instructions of Amenemhat, advice from a murdered pharaoh to his son, warning of betrayal and urging vigilance. Hymns to the Nile, celebrating the river as the bringer of life. These works were not only beautiful but deeply human, filled with emotion, doubt, and longing. Reading them today, we hear the voices of people who lived 4,000 years ago, their hopes, fears, and wisdom echoing across the millennia. Religion and the democratization of the afterlife. Another profound shift happened in the Middle Kingdom. The afterlife became more accessible. In the Old Kingdom, eternal life was largely reserved for the pharaoh and his close circle. Ordinary people might hope for some shadowy continuation, but the king was the one who rose to join the gods. In the Middle Kingdom, this changed. Belief spread that all Egyptians, not just royalty, could hope for eternal life if they lived in accordance with Ma'at and received proper burial rites. Coffins from this period, even for non-royals, were inscribed with coffin texts, spells and prayers to guide the dead in the afterlife. This democratization of eternity gave new comfort to the common people. It also shaped Egyptian society, encouraging devotion, morality, and preparation for the next world. Trade and expansion. The Middle Kingdom also expanded Egypt's horizons. Pharaohs sent expeditions to Nubia for gold, ivory, and exotic goods. They traded with the Levant, bringing in cedar wood from Lebanon, incense from Punt, modern Somalia, Eritrea, and lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan. Imagine a caravan winding through the desert, laden with treasures, gold glinting in the sun, jars of fragrant myrrh, baskets of rare spices. Ships sailed down the Red Sea, their sails filled with wind, carrying Egyptians farther than ever before. These contacts enriched Egypt not just with wealth, but with ideas, technologies, and cultural exchange. The decline of the Middle Kingdom, but even golden ages fade. By around 1800 BCE, the Middle Kingdom weakened. Successive rulers could not match the strength of their predecessors. Internal strife grew, and from the north came new challengers, a mysterious people known as the Hyksos, who introduced the horse-drawn chariot and new weapons of war. As the Middle Kingdom fell into decline, Egypt entered another period of disunity, the Second Intermediate Period. The Hyksos gained control of the Delta, ruling alongside native Egyptian dynasties in the south. It was another age of division and uncertainty. But once again, Egypt would rise from the shadows. From Thebes would come warrior kings who expelled the Hyksos and forged the most glorious era of all, the New Kingdom, the age of empire, temples, and some of the most famous names in Egyptian history. The Middle Kingdom gave Egypt its soul, its stories, its philosophies, its promise of eternal life for all. And though it fell, it paved the way for Egypt's greatest age to come. Part 4: The New Kingdom, Age of Empire and Glory. The Second Intermediate Period, Shadows before Dawn. Before the glory of the New Kingdom, Egypt endured the Second Intermediate Period, c. 1650 to 1550 BCE. Foreign rulers known as the Hyksos had seized control of the northern delta. They brought with them new technologies, the horse-drawn chariot, the composite bow, and bronze weapons. For Egyptians, proud of their ancient traditions, this was a humiliation. Pharaohs in Thebes still ruled in the south, but their authority was limited. For a century, Egypt remained divided, its people caught between foreign rulers and native kings. But Thebes was not idle. Its kings learned from the Hyksos, adopting their chariots and weapons. Slowly, they built strength. By around 1550 BCE, Pharaoh Ahmose I rose from Thebes, waged war, and drove the Hyksos from Egypt. With their expulsion, a new age dawned, the New Kingdom, Egypt's most powerful era. The rise of the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom, c. 1550-1070 BCE, was Egypt at its height. The pharaohs became conquerors, extending their power far beyond the Nile. Wealth poured in from Nubia, the Levant, and even Mesopotamia. Temples rose higher, statues grew larger, art and culture flourished. The Egyptians called this era the time of the warrior pharaohs, kings and queens whose names still echo today. The warrior pharaohs. Thutmose first began Egypt's expansion, campaigning deep into Nubia and pushing Egypt's borders farther than ever. His daughter, Hatshepsut, would later reign as one of the most remarkable rulers in history. Taking the throne as a female pharaoh, a rarity in Egypt, she styled herself in traditional regalia, even wearing the false beard of kingship. Yet her reign was not of war, but of prosperity and trade. Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, with its grand terraces rising against the cliffs, still stuns visitors today. She sent great expeditions to Punt, bringing back gold, incense, exotic animals, and treasures. Under her rule, Egypt thrived peacefully. Later came Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of Egypt. He transformed Egypt into a true empire, leading campaigns across the Levant and into Mesopotamia. With his victories, Egypt became the dominant power of the ancient Near East. Tribute flowed in from subject states: gold, silver, horses, cedar wood, and more. Amenhotep III and the Age of Opulence. By the 14th century BCE, Egypt was dazzling in its wealth. Amenhotep III ruled over a kingdom at peace and prosperity. He built lavish temples, colossal statues, and palaces filled with art. His reign is remembered as one of stability, diplomacy, and splendor. Imagine walking into Thebes during this time. The great temple of Karnak stretched endlessly, its forest of columns painted in bright colors. Processions of priests carried statues of gods through the streets. Music and chanting filled the air. The Nile glittered with barges carrying offerings. Egypt was not only powerful but radiant, a jewel of the ancient world. Akhenaten and the Amarna Revolution. But then came a pharaoh who changed everything. Akhenaten, originally named Amenhotep IV, he rejected Egypt's traditional gods and proclaimed worship of a single deity, the Aten, the sun disk. He closed temples, moved the capital to a new city called Akhetaten, modern Amarna, and portrayed himself and his queen, Nefertiti, in a radically new artistic style. Intimate, natural, even tender, with their children at play. For a brief moment, Egypt became almost monotheistic, devoted to the Aten. But many resisted. After Akhenaten's death, his successors, including the young boy king Tutankhamun, restored the old religion. The Amarna period was erased from official records, its temples abandoned. Tutankhamun, the boy king. Tutankhamun ruled only briefly, dying around age 18. In life, he was a minor king. In death, he became immortal. When his tomb was discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter, it was filled with dazzling treasures: golden chariots, jeweled masks, statues, furniture, and more. Unlike the great tombs of other pharaohs, his had remained nearly untouched by thieves. The discovery captured the world's imagination and made King Tut the most famous pharaoh today. The Ramesside pharaohs. The last great dynasty of the New Kingdom produced some of Egypt's most powerful rulers. The Ramesside kings. Ramesses II, known as Ramesses the Great, reigned for 66 years. He fought mighty battles, including the famous clash with the Hittites at Kadesh, one of the earliest recorded battles in history. Though the battle was indecisive, Ramesses proclaimed victory and celebrated himself with colossal statues and temples. He built vast monuments, the temples at Abu Simbel, carved into cliffs and aligned with the sun, and additions to Karnak and Luxor that still awe visitors today. His reign left Egypt covered in stone inscriptions proclaiming his might. Ramesses II became the very image of a pharaoh, proud, ambitious, larger than life. Later generations would call him simply the Great Ancestor. The decline of the New Kingdom. But even greatness fades. After the Ramesside kings, Egypt weakened. Foreign powers grew stronger and Egypt's empire slipped away. By 1070 BCE, the New Kingdom ended, giving way to another period of division and decline. Still, the monuments remained: vast temples, colossal statues, golden treasures. The New Kingdom had been Egypt's brightest flame, and though it dimmed, its light echoes across millennia. The Old Kingdom gave us pyramids. The Middle Kingdom gave us literature and philosophy. The New Kingdom gave us empire, wealth, and names that would echo forever: Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ramesses the Great. But Egypt's story did not end here. Centuries of struggle remained: invasions, foreign rulers, decline, and finally the shadow of Rome. Part 5, the Late Period, Foreign Invasions and the Struggle for Survival. The Third Intermediate Period, a fractured land. After the brilliance of the New Kingdom, Egypt entered the Third Intermediate Period, c. 1070 to 6664 BCE. The empire was gone. Egypt's borders shrank back to the Nile Valley. Wealth dwindled, and most importantly, unity cracked. Power was divided between the pharaohs of Tanis in the Delta and the high priests of Amun in Thebes. Religion and politics merged in new ways, but the cost was fragmentation. In the south, the great god Amun became more powerful than ever, his priests sometimes rivaling kings themselves. Meanwhile, Egypt faced new waves of outsiders. Libyan tribes had long lived on its western borders, and now Libyan chiefs began to seize authority inside the Delta. Over time, these Libyan dynasties became fully Egyptianized, adopting pharaonic titles and rituals. Egypt absorbed them, but the sense of old unity was fading. The Kushite pharaohs, Egypt and Nubia, united. From the south, another power emerged, Kush, in Nubia, modern Sudan. The Kushites admired Egyptian culture and built their own pyramids, temples, and statues. Around 747 BCE, the Kushite king Pia marched north, conquering Egypt and reuniting the land under his rule. Imagine the sight: Nubian warriors in plumed crowns, archers famed for their skill, priests of Amun blessing the new pharaoh. For a brief moment, Egypt was whole again, ruled by the 25th dynasty, often called the Black Pharaohs. These kings restored temples, revived art, and emphasized devotion to Amun. But their rule faced a growing menace from the east, the Assyrian Empire, masters of iron weapons and ruthless conquest. The Assyrian invasions. In the 7th century BCE, the Assyrians swept into Egypt. Their armies, hardened from campaigns across Mesopotamia, invaded with siege engines, iron swords, and unmatched brutality. Pharaohs like Taharka of Kush fought valiantly, but by 671 BCE, Assyrian armies captured Memphis, sacked cities, and installed vassal rulers. Egypt was humbled, its independence shaken by foreign domination. Yet the Egyptians were nothing if not resilient. After the Assyrians withdrew, a new dynasty rose in the Delta, the 26th dynasty, based at Sais. This was the beginning of what historians call the Late Period, the Site Renaissance. The kings of Sais, especially Psamtik I, sought to restore Egypt's strength. They revived traditional art, rebuilt temples, and hired Greek mercenaries to strengthen their armies. Trade with Greece flourished, and Egypt became a crossroads of cultures once again. Picture the streets of Sais during this time: Egyptian priests chanting hymns in the temples, while Greek traders bargained in the markets. Sculptors carved statues in the old styles, imitating the grandeur of the Old Kingdom. It was a deliberate revival, a nostalgic look back to Egypt's golden ages. But beneath the surface, Egypt's independence was fragile. Powerful empires were rising, first Persia, then Greece, and later Rome. The sands of time were shifting. Persian conquest. In 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II invaded Egypt. His victory at the Battle of Pelusium was legendary. According to later tales, he ordered cats and other animals sacred to Egyptians to be carried on the battlefield, causing the defenders to hesitate. Whether truth or myth, the result was clear: Egypt fell. Persia absorbed Egypt into its vast empire. The pharaohs were replaced by Persian kings, ruling from afar. Temples were still respected, but true independence was gone. Yet rebellions flared. Egyptians never fully accepted foreign rule. For brief periods, native dynasties regained the throne, but Persia always returned with overwhelming power. The coming of Alexander the Great. By the 4th century BCE, Persia's grip was weakening. From the north came a new conqueror, Alexander the Great of Macedonia. In 332 BCE, Alexander marched into Egypt. Instead of resistance, he was welcomed as a liberator. The Egyptians, weary of Persian domination, hailed him as pharaoh. At Siwa Oasis, priests declared him the son of Amun, affirming his divine right to rule. Alexander founded a new city on the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria. With its lighthouse, libraries, and bustling harbors, it would become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. For Egypt, it marked the beginning of the Hellenistic Age. The Late Period was a time of struggle, invasions, and fleeting revivals. Egypt endured, adapting to Libyan chiefs, Nubian kings, Assyrian warlords, and Persian emperors. Yet each wave left its mark, and each made Egypt a little less the master of its own destiny. Still, the spirit of the Nile endured, and in the age of Alexander and his successors, Egypt would shine once more, but under foreign rulers. Part 6. The Ptolemies, Cleopatra, and the Coming of Rome. Narration tone, smooth but tinged with the feeling of twilight. The grandeur of Egypt now filtered through foreign dynasties and fading independence. Alexander's legacy. When Alexander the Great entered Egypt in 332 BCE, he was greeted not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. Egyptians, weary of Persian domination, saw in him a chance for renewal. At the Siwa oasis, priests proclaimed him the son of Amun, affirming his place as pharaoh. Though Alexander spent only a short time in Egypt, his presence left a permanent mark. He ordered the founding of Alexandria, a city on the Mediterranean coast that would become a beacon of knowledge, trade, and culture. Its lighthouse, the Pharos, would be counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But Alexander did not stay. He marched eastward, conquering Persia and beyond until his untimely death in 323 BCE. His vast empire shattered, divided among his generals. Egypt fell into the hands of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander's trusted companions. Thus began the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek ruling house that would reign for nearly 300 years. The Ptolemaic kingdom. The Ptolemies ruled as pharaohs, blending Greek and Egyptian traditions. They built temples in traditional styles, honoring gods like Horus, Isis, and Osiris, while also promoting Greek culture, philosophy, and science. In Alexandria, the famous Library of Alexandria grew, a repository of knowledge where scholars collected texts from across the known world, from Greece, Babylon, India, and beyond. Imagine walking its halls, shelves stacked with scrolls, the air thick with ink and parchment, scholars debating the nature of the cosmos beneath oil lamps. Egypt under the Ptolemies became a cultural crossroads. Greek settlers mingled with Egyptians, blending traditions. Statues depicted rulers in both Greek and pharaonic style, their crowns a fusion of worlds. Festivals honored both Olympian gods and Egyptian deities. Yet beneath this cultural richness lay tension. The Greek elite often ruled over the native Egyptians, leading to resentment and uprisings. The Ptolemies maintained power through wealth, diplomacy, and at times ruled Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh. Of all the Ptolemies, one name eclipses the rest: Cleopatra VII, the last queen of Egypt. Born in 69 BCE, Cleopatra was intelligent, ambitious, and multilingual, said to speak as many as 9 languages. Unlike many of her predecessors, she embraced her Egyptian identity, portraying herself as the goddess Isis reborn. Her charisma, wit, and political skill made her one of the most famous figures in history. Cleopatra's reign was marked by turmoil. Egypt was no longer the mighty empire of old, but a kingdom caught between greater powers, particularly Rome, which by the 1st century BCE dominated the Mediterranean. To preserve her throne and Egypt's independence, Cleopatra formed alliances with Rome's most powerful men. She became the partner of Julius Caesar, bearing him a son, Caesarion. After Caesar's assassination, she allied with Mark Antony, sharing both love and political ambition. Their partnership, however, set them against Octavian, the future Augustus Caesar. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, Octavian's forces defeated Antony and Cleopatra's fleet. Fleeing back to Egypt, the lovers made their final stand. In 30 BCE, as Octavian closed in, Antony fell on his sword. Cleopatra, unwilling to be paraded in Rome as a captive, chose her own death. According to legend, she allowed a venomous asp, a sacred Egyptian cobra, to bite her. With her death, Egypt's independence ended. Egypt becomes a Roman province. After Cleopatra's death, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. Octavian, now Augustus, took personal control of its vast wealth, using its grain to feed Rome. The age of the pharaohs, which had lasted for over 3,000 years, was over. The pyramids still stood, the temples still towered, the Nile still flowed, but Egypt was no longer its own master. The legacy of the Ptolemies. Though their dynasty ended in tragedy, the Ptolemies left a lasting mark. Alexandria remained a center of learning for centuries. Egyptian religion continued to influence the Mediterranean world. The goddess Isis, for example, became popular across Rome. And Cleopatra's story, woven of power, love, and loss, became legend. To this day, she symbolizes both the brilliance and the fragility of Egypt's final chapter. Softened tone, preparing for the grand conclusion. With Cleopatra's death, the long story of pharaohs came to an end, but Egypt's legacy, its monuments, its myths, its vision of eternity, would outlast empires, carrying its spirit into the modern world. Part 7. Legacy of Ancient Egypt and Closing Narrative. The eternal legacy of ancient Egypt. Though the pharaohs are long gone, their civilization left behind echoes that still shape the world today. The pyramids still rise above the desert, their stones weathered but unbroken after nearly 5 millennia. The temples of Luxor and Karnak still stand, their columns towering like stone forests. The hieroglyphs still whisper their messages across the walls, carved by hands that have been dust for thousands of years. But Egypt's legacy is not only in stone. It is in ideas, symbols, and inspirations that have crossed time itself, contributions to knowledge. The Egyptians were among the first to write with ink on papyrus, creating a system of record-keeping that influenced civilizations to come. Their hieroglyphic script inspired fascination and mystery until it was finally deciphered in the 19th century, opening a window into their world. They studied medicine, cataloging illnesses and treatments in the Edwin Smith Papyrus and the Ebers Papyrus, some of the earliest medical texts. They tracked the stars, developing a calendar based on the rising of Sirius, the star that signaled the Nile's flood. Mathematics, engineering, and architecture reached heights that still astound us. Consider the precision of the Great Pyramid's alignment to the cardinal points, or the skill of carving colossal statues from single blocks of stone. These were not mere monuments, they were testaments to human ingenuity, religion, and the afterlife. Egypt's vision of the afterlife also left a lasting impression. Their belief that death was not the end but a transition influenced neighboring cultures and echoed through time. Concepts like the weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at, a judgment of truth, justice, and morality, foreshadowed later ideas of divine judgment. The imagery of resurrection, of gods dying and being reborn, found parallels in many traditions that followed. Even today, symbols like the Ankh, the key of life, or the Eye of Horus remain powerful emblems of protection, eternity, and mystery, inspiring the modern world. From Greek philosophers who studied in Egypt, to Roman emperors who built obelisks in their cities, to modern scientists and artists, Egypt has inspired countless generations. Napoleon's soldiers marveled at the pyramids, declaring that 40 centuries looked down upon you. Victorian adventurers filled museums with statues and sarcophagi, fueling global fascination. Hollywood films, novels, and documentaries continue to return to the sands of the Nile for stories of mystery and wonder. Even today, when we think of civilization itself, we think of Egypt, its pyramids, its pharaohs, its timeless allure. Closing narrative, the Nile flows forever now. As we close our long journey, let us return to the Nile. Imagine standing on its banks at twilight. The river glitters in the fading sun. Farmers bring in their harvest. Children laugh and play along the shore. In the distance, the great pyramids rise, silent and eternal. The pharaohs are gone, their kingdoms dust. The gods of Egypt are no longer worshipped in their temples. Yet the Nile still flows, carrying the memory of millennia within its waters. Egypt's story is one of resilience, of a civilization that rose from simple villages to build wonders that outlast empires. It is a story of kings and queens, of priests and peasants, of myths and monuments, of death and eternal life. And though time has carried us far from those days, the fascination endures. Ancient Egypt remains not a civilization lost, but one forever alive in our imagination. Thank you for traveling through the sands of time tonight. May your dreams carry you peacefully, perhaps even to the banks of the Nile, where eternity whispers in the wind. Good night.